Okay, welcome everyone. You have made it to the final video, the big conclusion for our module on getting started with ggplot2. So we have been working with ggplot2, trying to get familiar with the grammar and the logic behind creating plots in ggplot2. Worked with bar plots, histograms, box plots, density plots. I want to talk about violin plots, which are basically very similar to box plots. So it's going to create a very similar plot as the previous box plot that we just created. And so if you are just getting started with this video and you're like, I only want to create a violin plot, that's the only reason why I opened this video. Please, kind sir, tell me how to create a violin plot. There's a link to this Colab notebook in the description of this video. If you click on the link, it'll open up this Colab notebook. There are some code cells prior to this one that you may need to run in order for this to work. Namely, you're going to need to install ggplot2 or load the ggplot2 package, install and load the Palmer Penguins package. And I think the easiest way to install all that stuff is to just insert a code cell here, go to runtime, run before. So for all of you that have been following along and keeping up, thank you for your patience. Everybody's all caught up. If you want some help on the Geom violin, which is what we're going to need to create a violin plot, you can open up the help documentation for Geom violin. If you ran that runtime run before, it may have opened up some other help documentation on the side. You can just close those down if you're not interested. But to create a violin plot, we would do it very similar to box plot. So in particular, let me just take the code from the previous code cell from creating a box plot. And so to create a violin plot, the geom is violin. So if you know how to create a box plot and you open up this video and you're like, how do I create a violin plot? The short answer is change box plot to violin, and there you go. But the longer answer is you would want to create your ggplot object. Our data frame is called penguin. So I first enter the name of my data frame, right? Then we create our aesthetic. And for the case of a violin plot, I'm going to map a categorical variable to one of my axes. In this case, species is being stored as a factor variable in the penguin's data frame. So I'm mapping this categorical variable to the x-axis, and bill length, millimeter, is a numeric variable that I'm going to map to the y-axis. And I don't need to map anything to the fill, but I want my violins to be colored differently. So I'm going to also map species to fill. So each of my violin plots has a different color. Then I'm going to just create the geom violin, and that would do the job. And then I'm going to click run here. And here's a violin plot. It also, because I mapped the fill aesthetic inside of the aesthetic over here, it creates a legend, which is a bit redundant because I can see which color was used for which species. So this command over here turns off the legend. And if I want to add this on, I just need to make sure I put a plus sign over here to add on this theme that says turn off the legend. And that's all that does. So that's it. There's my violin plot. Sorry if it was bit anticlimactic because all you really needed to do was just change box plot to violin. And if you're curious, like, what's the difference between a violin plot and a box plot? Not much. Like a violin plot is kind of like the density version of a box plot. It's like the continuous version of a box plot where we just get a little more granular information about the distribution of the value. So in a box plot, I don't really see any, well, not any, not really. I don't know at all how the values are distributed between consecutive numbers in the 5-number summary. I don't know anything about how the values are distributed between the minimum value and the first quartile. I don't know how the values are distributed between the first quartile and the median, right? I just see what those values are, but I don't know anything about how they're distributed. Are most of the values close to the first quartile, or are most of the values close to the median, or are most of the values in the middle between them? I don't know. I don't get that information from a box plot. But from a violin plot, we can see more information, right? I can see more carefully like how these values are distributed along the way. So we get a little bit more granular information about how the values are being distributed than we do from a box plot. And this gives us a way of comparing how this numeric value bill length is distributed differently for different values of the categorical variable species. So for these different species, I can see that, yeah, I mean, this first species, the bill length is really different compared to these other two. For these other two, like just looking at the box plots, they seem really similar looking at the box plots, but from the violin plots, I can see that there's a little bit more distinction. But here, I mainly just want to focus on the creation of these plots in ggplot2 in this video. Okay, so that's a big wrap on our introduction to working with ggplot2. And we are going to work more on ggplot2 in the videos next week. Thanks, everyone.